Many weeks ago, I did an in-depth review of Resident Evil 1 and explained why I not only loved the game, but thought it was revolutionary for its survival horror mechanics, impressive world building, and just overall polish. And today, it is my pleasure to talk about its 1998 sequel, Resident Evil 2. Much like the original, I didn't get around to playing this game until I was already a huge fan of the series and had already played titles like Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, Operation Raccoon City, etc. But before I would go on to play its 2019 remake, I purchased the game on the Vita to give it a spin. And for those of you wondering, the Vita port is basically the PSP port, which is basically just the original PS1 version of the game. When I started this up, I was expecting an exciting yet admittedly dated journey. After all, this game came out over 2 decades ago. Just made some of you in the audience feel super old, didn't I? Well, if you mentioned the fact Sly Cooper 1 is almost the same age, well, you won't be the only one feeling like a senior citizen. Anyways, back on topic. To my utter astonishment, Resident Evil 2 is not dated. Far from it actually. This game still holds up as a certified survival horror classic, and I could not for the life of me put it down back when I first started playing it last year. Before I dive deep into this wonderful experience, I should quickly summarize the backstory of this game's development, since most of you RE fans are already familiar with the story. After the huge success of the first game, Capcom knew they had something special, and work quickly began on the sequel, which was scheduled to release in 1997, 1 year after its predecessor. This time, Shinji Mikami, the main man calling the shots of the first game, took a producer role, with a new director taking on the mantle named Hideki Kamiya. I hope I pronounced that right. However, Mikami and Kamiya's vision constantly differed, and they often had a lot of disagreements during development. Once they were 2/3 done with the initial version of the game, dubbed by the fandom as Resident Evil 1.5, Mikami wasn't at all happy with how the game was turning out, along with Kamiya. So this version of the game was scrapped, and they had to start all over again. Side note, they did end up reusing most textures, models, and animations for the final game. This development hell would push the game back to a 1998 release. Now this 1.5 build is very interesting to look at. Some scrapped concepts included a character named Elza Walker who were going to be replaced by Claire Redfield, different starting locations, and it's theorized that Marvin would have had a larger role to play in the story. While this 1.5 build is very interesting, I am thankful it got scrapped due to the nature of the RPD resembling that of a modern precinct, which made the environment and setting pretty bland. However, this 1.5 version is actually playable due to the work of some talented modders, so if this piques your curiosity, you can give it a roll on your computer. But due to this build never being finished, you'll only be able to get so far before running into a progression barrier. With the history lesson out of the way, let's talk about some Resident Evil 2. Now if you recall in my last review, I mentioned how I couldn't record any internal gameplay due to not having a capture card, OBS, or computer for that matter, and nothing has changed since then, so yeah. We're back to cam footage. I promise once we get to Code Veronica we can escape this awful 2009 YouTube quality, but until then, this is the only way I can show off the game without ripping someone's footage off of YouTube, so this is the best I can do for you guys. On the bright side, I recorded the gameplay at night this time, because for some reason I just didn't do that last time, so hopefully the footage is a little more clear for you guys. Now, releasing only 2 years after the original, Resident Evil 2 isn't much of a graphical upgrade, but disregarding the development time, how could they top the original of how polished and well detailed it looked? And yet, it did. Resident Evil 2 truly pushes the PS1 to its limits with its very well designed pre-rendered environments, smooth cutscenes, and beautifully detailed models and textures. This game has no right looking as good as it does for a 1998 PS1 game. Going into more detail, I should start out with the cutscenes. Instead of returning to live action, the game opts instead for CG. This is likely due to how the first game's cutscenes, along with pretty much everything story related, was received as overly cheesy and campy. Like I mentioned previously, this game is going for a Hollywood blockbuster type feel, and the live action cutscenes in the first game doesn't exactly correlate with that vision. While I love the nostalgia and camp of the first game's live action cutscenes, CG was definitely the way to go, especially in this game's case since the cutscenes look stunning for their time. While the animations are a little stiff and janky at times, they still look great and have good direction. Switching over to the environments, this game excels. The abandoned, nightmarish streets of Raccoon City, the calm tranquility of the RPD, the disgusting and grotesque sewers, the high-tech, clean umbrella facility over one of the very monsters it helped create. Each of the environments are distinct from one another, and the masterful art direction makes each of these locations feel truly special. And the soundtrack. This is up there in my favorite Resident Evil tracks of all time. Whether the music is going for a haunting, calm, chaotic, or somber feel, it's always orchestrated beautifully. I am always blown away by the level of polish and detail these games have, and Resident Evil 2 completely blows presentation out of the water. Now, being a sequel to an already revolutionary game, why fix what isn't broken? RE2 plays exactly how RE1 does in terms of base gameplay. You start out in an elaborate police precinct that is more of a maze than a building. It's up to you to salvage for whatever resources you can find and use them wisely as you maneuver your way through the building, unlocking new areas via puzzle solving and facing off against undead monstrosities. If you were a fan of the first game, you are basically guaranteed to love this one as well, since things like herbs, item boxes, and every other main gameplay feature from the previous installment makes a return. But this is far from an exact copy of the last game, since this one offers many new changes to not only provide a unique experience, but to also outdo its older brother. Starting with location, having the sequel to Resident Evil take place in the RPD, aka the Raccoon City Police Department, probably sounded odd since a police precinct doesn't match the size or complexity of a mansion. However, after the 1.5 build, a genius decision was made to have the RPD be an old art museum that was later converted to be a police station. This made the RPD around the same size, if not bigger than the mansion, and also gave us a huge area fit for exploration and puzzle solving. Now, while the atmosphere may not be as spooky as the mansion was in the last game, the wrecked and blood-stained walls of the RPD as a result of the police's hopeless stand against the undead still hammer in that horror feel. Now, one of the coolest things about this game that no other game in the series has attempted is the A and B scenarios. Just like the last game, you get two playable characters, Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield. However, whoever you play as first will be your A playthrough, and whoever you second playthrough will be is your B playthrough. In your A run, your character is the one who arrives at the precinct first and they start from the front of the RPD. In your B run, your character arrives at the RPD second and you start from the side of the RPD. As you play, your story will be altered to fit the events of what happened in the A scenario if you're playing the B scenario. So yes, there are 4 ways to play this game. Did I ever mention I love replayability? I should probably get into the differences between these two characters. Leon, much like Chris from the last game, has a lighter as his unique item, whereas Claire continues the Master of Unlocking's legacy by being equipped with a lockpick. And yes, the lockpick is still leagues better than the lighter, which is only used for like one puzzle. Another cool thing this game does is give both of these characters specific weapons. While a handgun, knife, and SMG are available in both runs, Leon's exclusive arsenal consists of a shotgun, flamethrower, and magnum. Claire's exclusive arsenal consists of a grenade launcher, bow gun, and spark shot. While the grenade launcher is fun to use, I find myself preferring Leon's arsenal more since you get to fully use the shotgun more than you do the grenade launcher, and the bow gun and spark shot are next to useless. But what Resident Evil review would this be if we didn't cover the enemy types? The most common enemy you'll be facing on your journey are the aggressive, cannibalistic, undead walking shells of the victims to the T-virus.
Zombies.
They serve their purpose much like the first game. They're creepy, they're everywhere, and they are to be avoided or silenced depending on your situation. Also returning from the first game are Cerberuses and Spiders, who both only appear in minor sections of the game. However, this game has 2 newly introduced enemy types, with my favorite one of the entire game being the Lickers. These crawling nightmares is what a complete mutation of the T-virus looks like. Now, as you can see, all of the victim's skin has shed and their muscles have expanded to the point where they serve as a protective outer shell. Design alone, they look terrifying with their exposed brains and insanely long tongues. And it only gets worse from there. See, Lickers don't fuck around. If they hear you, they will take you down in possibly a matter of seconds, and they take a considerable amount of damage to kill. But notice how I said here. Due to their eyes being completely absent, the Lickers have to rely on their sense of hearing, meaning they can only sense you if you run, shoot, or get too close to them. This creates some tense situations where you find yourself having to be careful to not aggro these formidable enemies. I absolutely love the Lickers, and it's no wonder how they became a fan favorite and series regular monster. Then there's the Ivy. Plant-like monsters seen in the lab section of the game. While their designs are somewhat neat, they're not scary or exciting, and all they do is shoot poison at you. Or grab you and infect you with said poison. Yeah, not a fan of the Ivy. While this game only admittedly added 1 enemy type, the enemy variety does work well and will consistently have you changing your approach to certain situations. But the common enemy types aren't the only threats preventing your escape from this hellish precinct. On to sub-bosses. There's only 2 of them. First is a giant fucking alligator that looks cool as shit, but you'll kill in a matter of seconds. And second is the one and only Mr. X. I'll first look at a fully controlled tyrant who's absolutely unkillable and will stalk the player from time to time during the B playthrough. Now the concept for Mr. X sounds cool, but he's not really all that terrifying. Once he shows up, you basically just have to take a hit and run past him or stun him to get by. Either way, you won't have to deal with him till later. However, what's undeniable about this boss is he did pave the way for legends to come such as Nemesis and his remake counterpart. Now it's time for main bosses. The first I'll talk about is the G-Adult. This deformed abomination is a product of what happens after a G-embryo becomes incompatible with its host and separates as its own entity. This fight is pretty easy if you have the right weapons, but fuck these bugs that occasionally crawl all over you. But in retrospect, that's one of the few bosses you'll encounter that's not this mutating monster, William Birkin. While not much is known about this creature, he's the main threat you'll be facing throughout your journey, which means he'll be taking most of the boss fights. The thing that makes Birkin awesome is he's constantly mutating as the game progresses. His G1 fight is pretty simple, since it takes only a tight bridge where all you have to do is load into him. His G2 fight is easily the most exciting since it takes place on a tight elevator where you have to predict his movements and stay ahead of him. G3 is the B version of this fight where Birkin is now supporting 2 new arms and is more mobile and dangerous. G4 is the final boss of your A playthrough where Birkin has now mutated into a quadruped monster and as a result is an insanely quick and hard to hit. This fight provides a nice challenge and is a cool end to the game. The other final boss on the B playthrough is the Super Tyrant, Mr. X's final form. This fight is in my opinion the most difficult since the Tyrant is now insanely fast and can kill you relatively quickly. So yeah, this game delivers what is really a solid gameplay experience. It takes what worked in the first game but expands it with new enemies, a new exciting location to explore, thrilling bosses, a new arsenal of weapons, and the genius A-B system which unfortunately was never done again in the series. If you're a fan of RE1, this game has all of that and more while still keeping things fresh. But the gameplay is not the only great thing about RE2. No, how could I call myself a reviewer if I didn't touch on the story? Set 2 months after RE1, you follow 2 main characters. First is Leon S. Kennedy, a rookie police officer rocking an awesome 90s cut. After a hard breakup, Leon's drunken night at a motel has made him late to his first day on the job, and he's now arriving at Raccoon City to start his duty in the RPD. Claire Redfield, the sister of Chris Redfield from the first game, has arrived in Raccoon City to search for a missing brother. The two learn quickly that things in Raccoon City aren't as simple as they seem, and they eventually cross paths.
Wait! Don't shoot!
Get down! We can't stay out here. Head to the police station. It'll be a lot safer. There! Buckle up.
Okay.
You okay?
Still in one piece.
That maniac's gonna ram us! Claire!
Leon!
I'm okay. Head to the station. I'll meet you there.
Okay.
Now separated, both of them continue with Leon's plan to make a run for the RPD, arriving at 2 separate locations. Now I think now is a good time to get into these 2 characters. You learn quickly that Leon has the heart of gold, always wanting to help everyone he comes across and do the right thing. The downside of this golden boy mindset is that it makes him pretty naive, and while his wits and courage keeps him alive, he is clearly out of his depth. Much like Claire, who's just a 19-year-old college student. But almost as a direct contrast to Leon, Claire doesn't put up with anyone's bullshit and is a confident, level-headed woman who later takes the responsibility of a mother to help protect the character we'll later discuss. I love both of these characters, and the journey they go through in this game helps us better understand who they are as people. While Resident Evil 1 had some great characters, we didn't really get to dive deep into their broader personalities, so this was a nice change of pace. Getting back to the story, Leon and Claire, now adjusted to the hell that is the RPD, meet up in the STARS office, and Claire learns her brother left Raccoon City a while back, and the two survivors decide to make an escape. Now, surrounding the background of the RPD, you get to read files detailing its final days before it eventually got overrun, and it's a nice bit of background info. As Claire, you find a way into Chief Irons' office, and you meet the man himself, who... how do I put this politely? Is creepy as fuck. In all seriousness, this is a great introduction to Chief Irons, since in your first encounter with him, he has the corpse of the mayor's daughter sprawled on his table, and he even comments on how beautiful her skin is. Irons is a really creepy character, and you eventually find out he hunts people as a fun hobby, specifically young women. Fun! After this odd encounter, you meet this little girl named Sherry. Now, as far as kid characters go, Sherry is pretty awesome. Not only does she help you out at some point, but you really sympathize for this neglected child who's unfortunately found herself in the middle of all this mess. After more puzzle solving, you're confronted by Irons, who has now lost every last bit of his marbles, and he intends to take you with him. It's here where he meets his end in one or two ways. He's either severed in half by Birkin, or, my personal favorite, is implanted with a G embryo and splits in half once it emerges from his body. So long, Chief. Back to Leon. In his story, you meet Ada Wong, a FBI agent on a mission to learn about this mysterious G virus and stop Umbrella. Her straightforward and professional attitude is a nice contrast from Leon, who tends to act mostly on emotion. Now, at first, Ada is a one-dimensional love interest, but her character goes in a cool direction later. But first, they meet a reporter named Ben, who refuses to leave his cell out of fear of Birkin. But his efforts are in vain since, like Irons, he's either maimed by Birkin or splits in half from the G embryo. Now, at this point in the story, you start uncovering some interesting information. It turns out that Irons was receiving money from Umbrella, and in exchange, not only stopped any and all investigations surrounding the company, but also allowed a scientist named William Birkin to have a lab right under the precinct. This explains why the company wasn't exposed by the surviving STARS team from RE1. Without clearance from the chief, there's nothing that can be done legally. In both runs, you meet Annette Birkin, wife of William Birkin. In Leon's story, she serves as a simple obstacle to Leon and Ada's attempt to recover a G sample and shut down Umbrella. But in Claire's story, there's much more context given to this character. Both Annette Birkin and William Birkin are the parents of Sherry Birkin, the girl Claire is looking out for. See, William Birkin was a scientist for Umbrella who was developing an all-new virus. But after planning on betraying the company, Umbrella mercenaries break into his lab.
It's sheer perfection. My precious G-Virus. No one will ever take you away from me.
There he is.
So you finally come.
Doctor, we're here to collect the G-Virus sample.
Sorry, but I won't just hand over my life's work.
Stop. You might hit the sample. That's it, all right. Okay, let's move out.
William. Oh, my. Hold on, darling. I'm taking care of that bullet wound first. Stay here.
So the monster roaming around is William Birkin, who is infected with the incomplete virus he created, which is mutating him at a rapid rate. Leon takes a bullet for Ada and is put out of commission for a while, leaving it up to the agent to confront Annette. In Claire's story, she and Sherry are separated before meeting Annette. In both stories, the characters are reunited with their partner and they take an elevator deeper into the Umbrella lab where they're either confronted by G2 or G3 Birkin. In Leon's story, Ada is knocked the fuck out, but in Claire's story, the elevator takes Sherry deeper into the lab, once again separating the two. After some puzzle solving, Leon takes the G-Virus sample, but is confronted by Annette, who is either fatally wounded by collapsing debris, or killed by Birkin himself. In Claire's story, she once again meets Sherry and realizes the pendant around her neck contains the G-Virus, which is drawing Mr. X to her. She baits the monster by throwing the pendant into a vat of lava, which the creature mindlessly falls into. Back to Leon, the big twist is revealed. Ada is not an FBI agent. She's a mercenary hired to retrieve a G sample to some unknown buyer. Her and Leon draw their weapons, but Leon lowers his, believing in the good of Ada. And in a shocking turn of events, she can't shoot Leon, confirming the love between the two was real. However, she is instantly shot afterwards by Annette and she falls into the abyss of the Umbrella lab, to Leon's anguish and grief. In a fit of rage, he throws the G sample into the abyss with her after all the harm and death it's caused. Whoever is the A playthrough has to face off against G4 Birkin before making it to the Umbrella Train by the skin of their teeth. Whoever's the B playthrough takes care of Sherry and powers the Umbrella Train, but not before being confronted by Mr. X one last time. After a mysterious but familiar ally gives you a weapon to handle the creature, and a nice callback to the first game, the Tyrant's days are over.
You lose, big guy.
Now reunited on a train as the drives out the self-destructing Umbrella base, things are finally over. Psych. Yep, at the end of your B run, you witness the true ending. G5 Birkin, who has now mutated into an unrecognizable hunk of mass and teeth, has found its way onto the train, which is now about to self-destruct due to its biohazard containment protocol. The monster is fought off by the characters as it draws near.
This is not good.
Leon, where are you?
Wonderful.
Sherry? What are you doing?
We have to stop the train, right? I can do it.
But come and get me. I'm right here.
Which one's the right switch? Maybe this one?
Sherry!
Leon! Ah!
Can't hold on.
Push the switch over there!
Got it!
Finally, the exit.
Are you all right?
I'm okay.
Where's Claire? Claire? Claire!
Right here.
Claire!
I guess we all made it. They just won't quit. Come on, we have to get out of here. Run!
Now free from evil's clutches, the characters enjoy their freedom, but they both agree things are far from over. That concludes Resident Evil 2's story, and wow, what a step up from its predecessor. The pacing is absolutely flawless. Even the most minor characters are interesting in their own right. The new lore showing Umbrella's full control over the city and the creation of the G-Virus is intriguing, and Leon, Claire, and Sherry are amazing characters who have earned their right as series staples. Resident Evil 2 is one of my favorite Resident Evil stories of all time. In conclusion, Resident Evil 2 is a masterpiece. It stays true to the survival horror roots of its predecessor, but keeps things fresh and innovative with new enemy types, bosses, a great explorable precinct, and a wonderful story that still holds up to this day, despite some of its 90s cheese. I fucking love this game, and this is absolutely how you should do a sequel. Resident Evil 2 is not only one of the best Resident Evil games ever made, but it's one of my favorite Resident Evil games of all time. But what about you guys? What do you think of the game? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and soon I'll be covering Resident Evil 3 Nemesis.